Hello everyone, welcome back to the TJOmega channel for day 1039 of our daily content grind. It's yet another Here's 10, the best 10 toys of the year. I want to make something clear here. So, when I started doing these, it was like 2 weeks, maybe a week and a half in between episodes, so I didn't overload things, but then I realized I'm not going to finish by the end of the year. I need to pick up the pace, so I decided to start going weekly. The fact that it ended up being Tuesday is completely incidental. It just happened to be the last day that the previous schedule fell on, and I just kind of stuck to that, and the point I cut it off was also completely incidental. Fast forward to today. Do you know what the year is this week? It's 2002, which means it's Transformers Armada. Today is also my birthday. I have to be nice to Transformers Armada on my birthday, and I have only myself to blame. That said, it's not like the entire line is awful or anything. There's plenty of toys in Armada I really like, especially if we go by this whole format's whole criteria of bang for your buck, which actually allows us to mix things up quite a bit. It's not just the most expensive toy of the year that's going to be at number one. You know, we're going to have mini-cons that sneak into higher spots than you might expect. We'll be talking about deluxes over Voyagers, or Supercon over MaxCon, whatever. It's gonna be a weird one, so strap in. Here are the top 10 toys of the year 2002, and we are starting off with a mini-con team that I think is noteworthy for multiple reasons, and that is the Street Action mini-cons. This is something of a simple set. Now, if you're just judging by, like, playability of your mini-cons, okay, fair. This is probably not very high on your list. However, I think it is noteworthy not only because it's just doing something extremely unique at the time. It's a Transformer bicycle and a Transformer skateboard. You know, the scooter is at least viable. GoBots showed us that was possible. But the other two is kind of sensational. It's kind of ridiculous. I remember everyone flipping out when they found out how did they make a bicycle transform. And then the fact that they actually combine into Perceptor, and it's actually a pretty clean and good looking combiner. It's very impressive. Like, yeah, the individual figures, they're not the most articulated of the mini-cons, but I would still argue comparable to many of them. And function-wise, they're so unique. This is one of those things that I really felt like told you that, like, even though we were going back to Autobots versus Decepticons, that things were going to be different. This is like the first time Hasbro just kind of flexed a muscle and goes, look what we can do now. I think for that alone, it's worthy of the list. Very impressive team for the time. Lots to do with this set. There's no getting around the fact that Armada very much was a gimmicky toy line. They threw gimmicks into just about every figure because they were trying to get kids interested in these toys. Naturally, that's the goal of any toy line, but especially when you're in a rebuilding year like Armada was, that plays a far more significant role. So it's no surprise that things have to be judged by how well functioning they are gimmick-wise, and that brings us to Cyclonus. Articulation-wise, no, not the best on the block. However, just having a helicopter with a trigger to spin his rotor is actually a really cool feature to have. And then he went a lot further. On top of the fact that you did have firing missiles when minicons were attached, you could also attach his Crumple Zone minicon to the front to take him into more of an attack helicopter look. That's a great piece of integration. One of my favorite little tricks that this toy line did. If that's not enough, there were minicons that had spinning gimmicks when you rolled them. However, they have a gearing system that is exposed, and this toy is how you make use of them. Plugging them onto the bottom, and that exact same trigger that spins the propeller blade will also spin the minicon gimmick. That's a lot. For a $10 toy, that's doing a lot. Oh, and then you got flip out guns in the legs too. Because again, gimmicks abound. So, while it lacks in the articulation department, Cyclonus more than makes up for it in just fun tricks to do, and still comes up looking pretty nice in all modes, all things considered. Again, a little bit more simplistic because he's pulling off a lot of tricks, but that's what makes the toy engaging. And, you know, when you put this in the hands of a kid, there's a lot for them to do with it. It kind of, like, really shows why gimmick toys these days don't really measure up. When you're packing in this much into one $10 package, that's just good value. It's not just those larger toys that got the gimmicks, however. Even the mini-cons managed to work in some gimmickry, including the more traditional things like firing missiles, which brings us to one of my favorite teams, the Land Military Team. This is a nice, diverse little bunch. You know, they're all missile trucks of some form or variety, but they all manage to be fairly unique in not only in their vehicle modes, but how their robot modes are presented. You know, they look like they belong together, but they are also very distinct from one another, and it makes them a lot of fun as a set. What really makes them stand out, however, and I think you've already jumped to this conclusion, because, yeah, a lot of us did, it's all about, I believe, Bone Crusher, right there in the middle. If I'm getting the names right, minicons are hard to remember. Point being, it's one of the most unique Transformer experiences you're going to have, and it's at minicon size. This is a toy that rotates 180 degrees on its vertical axis in order to transform. You know, that's how you end up with his rear wheels in his chest. On top of that, very articulate for a little tiny minicon figure, and a very distinct look too. He's a standout. Like, if you're making if you are making a tier list of minicons, he belongs at the top. Simply put, it's one of the best in the entire line, and it's one of the first that ever came out. They never really reached these heights again, nor, you know, not in articulation, unique design, or just cleverness and transformation. Yeah, he pretty much ruled the roost, and it really does help that his partners in the minicon pack also are not slouches. A little bit more simple, but they do a good job of what they're doing. Very fun set, and the fact that all of them have firing missiles, even better. You might be surprised to find out the large Optimus Prime from 2002 does not feature on this list. I consider it a one-trick toy, and while that is a very cool trick that it does, that's pretty much it for the figure. The rest of the forms are simple in transformation, very boxy and low in articulation, and you start losing out on play features at that point. It all just becomes about making the big combination gimmick work, which takes me out of it. But we do have Bendy Prime instead. So, when all the other toys in this line seem to focus on articulation, or seem to focus on big gimmicks, they saw the need to have a more articulated take on their Optimus Prime design of the year. So at deluxe size, we got this beauty that became a gold standard for articulation for a few years at least. Yeah, this was the most articulated toy in all of Armada. Everything moved. It's got, you know, just about all of the modern articulation that we now expect from, you know, these toy lines. Right down to ankle tilts being one of the very first figures to feature it. Everyone swore by this toy, and everyone kind of had their own variant, because there were quite a few for this figure. It also helps that he came with what we thought of as the first Target Master since G1. Overrun as a minicon not only looks cool in both of his normal modes, forms a pretty nice gun for Prime as well. All around great package. Minicon gimmick sucks. Let's be clear here. The minicon gimmick sucks. And if the minicon gimmick was better, I probably would have marked him a little bit higher, because the gimmickry is kind of the thing of this series. So he's basically making articulation a gimmick. And actually in 2002, that was a gimmick. And he did a really, really good job of it, to the point where people are still talking about this toy today. Here's the last minicon team we're going to be talking about for this particular list, And yeah, you might be surprised when I point out that it is a team that I have had history with, and not in the good way. But I will admit the air defense minicons are really, really good. They are a nice match set of blue, silver, and white figures. They have a really nice, clean aesthetic to them. They have, very traditional trappings with the wings on the backs and everything. All different unique vehicles. And then, of course, the big thing that everyone flipped out about and everyone loved back in the day, the fact that they could combine into a sword weapon. That was incredibly clever. Okay, Perceptor's one thing. Make a little robot out of 3 smaller robots. Okay, we've done things like that. This was completely unique and new. Making big weapons by combining little figures. That's actually pretty cool. Now, it's obviously the clear plastic that got me back in the day. My Jetstorm in particular literally fell apart on me because of that stuff. I don't think this team really sings until you get the repaint Darksaber team later on. But I'm not judging it by plastic flaws. I'm not judging it by, fragility over time. I am judging it for what it was at the time. And for what it was the mini-con set to have. Not only because it featured the most heavily in the show, but also just because it did one of the coolest things that the mini-cons did. And individually, they are not bad figures either. Yeah, all around, one of the best sets of mini-cons you could get. Now here's where we start dancing around the sizes, and you might start disagreeing, because I have a few preferences a little bit different than most. That said, I'm going to be throwing Jetfire onto this list. Yeah, I'm really impressed by this toy. I really am. So aside from the fact that it forms a better set of legs for Super Mode Optimus Prime, that's already a pretty cool thing to do. The toy to me is impressive because of a few different features. Number one, it's hollow in vehicle mode, which is something exceptionally rare. And that allowed you to store minicons inside his shuttle. That's pretty cool. The overall robot mode, I think, looks really, really cool. And it's actually fairly articulated for Transformers Armada. It's a really good, fresh take, kind of familiar on Jetfire, but still doing a completely its own thing. I think that works really, really well. I'm also leveraging a few points because it has a classic Generation 1 laser noise built into the gun, okay? Okay, I'm a sucker for that. I will admit that. He features his own minicon gimmicks too. Commodore, his minicon, does act as kind of a landing gear for him in vehicle mode, as well as activating missile drop gimmicks. So he's got his own features going on as well. He's gotten into the gimmickry. But just overall, I think it's a pretty surprisingly solid toy considering it has to be a combiner at some point. Does quite a lot. And I think it does a lot of it pretty well. It's a toy that doesn't really sacrifice for any of the things that it seems to be doing. All around, really, really nice package. If it was a little bit sturdier in robot mode, maybe makes it a little bit higher. But I think middle of the list, he's worthy of that. You're going to be surprised to find a few fan favorites off of this list. I'll warn you right now, more than halfway through the video, no Starscream. Because I feel like the low articulation and a lot of weirdness to his gimmicks and like how awkward it made the toy ends up hurting it in the long run. But there's some fan favorites that I can't deny, articulation level or not, again, because it's all about the playability factor. And that's what Sideways does really, really well. The return of the Headmaster gimmick, and not only is it a Headmaster, it's a faction switcher. This, I believe, was only the second one we had. Previous one was Transmetal 2 Black Arachnia. And this was just a cooler way to do it. Thanks to using the 2 minicons to differentiate which faction he was on, it gave him a different appearance based on whether he was an Autobot or Decepticon at the time. There's a fun running error where it accidentally switches which head reveals which symbol. You can see it's the wrong way around in this photo from TF Wiki. But it's not just about that. Aside from the fact that he also has his own head, just in case you lose your minicons, great thinking. And he does have minicon launch missiles, pretty standard for Armada. The fact that the Minicons can also combine into a rider for his vehicle mode gives him a lot more playability than a lot of motorcycle Transformers. Again, playability is the king in Transformers Armada. Fun factor is a king. This was a lot of fun. Like, this was one of those toys that had a ton of different options that you never really got tired of. To the point where I'm like, you saw the whole video I did way back when? I want more of these. Like, do a sideways with like 9, 10 heads. Do an LED display in the chest for all the action symbols. I don't care. I love this idea. I love this figure, and there's a reason why it's one of the most popular Armada toys. It just doesn't stop being fun. Now the question remains, can you actually have a heavily gimmicked figure but still have a level of articulation that the more mature and adult collectors of the world would be happy with? And the answer actually is yes. That would be Red Alert. So, while he does come across a little bit kibbly and backpacky for the sake of this, the fact that he does so much cannot be understated. For starters, you do have a flip-out weapon that can be shoulder-mounted or it can be mounted in his hand. That's a Minicon gimmick. You had electronic lights and sound features to him. You had a disc launcher in the chest. I do like me a disc launcher. You also had alternate weapons that you could use on his left hand, so you also had that as a possibility. The long arm Minicon, again, not a bad Minicon. He's got his own locations to mount on Red Alert, as you can see in the middle. But I think the big thing about Red Alert is the fact that he's got what would equate to like a modern level of articulation going on, despite how many gimmicks he has to him. He's doing a ton. And, you know, okay, admittedly, he's got some junk hanging around in order to compensate for that. But the fact that he retains this, you know, incredible level of articulation for this toy line and still has a lot of Minicon activated gimmickry, I think is an incredibly impressive feat. Absolutely great figure all around. One that I'm eager to see again in a future line eventually. You know, the fact we got Optimus, we got Hotshot. Yeah, Red Alert's overdue now. Based on the original toy alone, I would really like to have another one. If bang for your buck is a big factor in these top 10s, then I have to include my favorite deluxe very high up on the list. Let's talk about Demolishor. Here's a design I'm really shocked has not made a modern return. Look at this guy. Aside from the fact that the colors just work well. The red, the tan, the silver, all this pops really nice. I like the dark wash they did on him. Gives him a grittier look in vehicle mode. That's great. And, you know, outside, you know, if his shoulders moved outward, I would say he's also up there with Bendy Prime. Is like one of the most articulated Armada toys. Even without that accolade, his articulation is still very, very good. And then there's all the other things he can do, you know? Okay, so the tank mode, the top of it rotates. Perfect. You attach a Minicon to one of his shoulders. He launches those missiles. That's great. Said Minicon Blackout can also mount to the front of him to fill in the gap in the front of his tank mode. That's great. He has a button to launch him forward. That's really cool. Blackout has a spot to sit in the back. He can pilot the tank mode, or you can switch him to an anti-air emplacement, and he can aim that one as well. It also helps that Blackout is a very nice Minicon himself, with 2 variations of the vehicle mode that you can keep him in. It's an all-around fantastic package. You know, this is just an exceptionally good figure. Absolutely one of the best in Armada, and absolutely my favorite of the deluxes. How he's gone ignored for this long, I genuinely do not know. Yeah, but this one in this case doesn't matter. Go get yourself the original. If you've never experienced the toy, do yourself a favor. Go get it. I still need to get the purple and green one at some point. But that's for another time. This is still 2002. And this guy, yeah, back then he was one of the best. But in a line all about showing off what you could do with Minicons, for the first year there really could only be one answer to which is the best toy. That's going to be the Megatron of the year. Now, admittedly, Megatron is something of a brick from the waist down, so articulation, not his forte, but that's also not his goal. His goal is to show off just how expansive the Minicon gimmick and play pattern could actually get. This was boasted as holding 10 different Minicons at the same time. And there's a lot of things those Minicons can do. They can unlock hidden platforms where more Minicons can store. They can unlock cannon features like flip out missiles for Megatron. They can activate a knife that can eject from his hand. That's a cool little hidden trick. You also had the gimmick features that Megatron just had, like electronics, a capture area for Minicons, the jaws in the front of the vehicle mode that can bite down onto Minicons, all the other Minicon ports that you can mount and start messing around with, and there's even a ramp. There's even a side ramp for a Minicon to ride up on. All of this, usually you're going to experience with his Leader 1 Minicon, which is, again, kind of simplistic, but forms of some pretty nice things for him, like a gun, an arm-mounted weapon, things like that. They play well together. All of that rolled up into what is one of the more memorable Megatron designs. I would say more memorable than even like the future Energon and Cybertron ones. It just stands out. The tall horns, the tall shoulders, the familiar G2 purple and green. It's just a really, really spectacular toy. For 2002's lineup, you could not deny how much was going on. So, with that, I think I have to name Megatron the best toy of 2002. When the toy can just do that much with that year's gimmick, yeah, I can't deny it. I gotta give it its place. And that's gonna be the top 10 for the week. This one might be a little bit divisive. No Super Optimus Prime, no Starscream, certain Minicon teams left off. Admittedly, I had to chop a few from the list that I wasn't happy to chop. When I boil it down to which one were the 10, there is actually a little bit of a struggle to it. So, feel free to debate that in the comments below, and as always, I will see you next time.